Lovely. Thanks again, Richard. Well, we'll start again. Uh, Great to see you again, mate. I've got a paper that I've shared with you that I'd love to discuss today called Canaries in the Coal Mine. This is a recent one, came out August 2025, so only a couple of weeks ago as of this recording. And I think it's really interesting. It seems to be the first paper that shows what a lot of us have suspected for a while, that AI is actually going to jeopardize some jobs, but this is now the beginning of proof. So, love to kind of get your thoughts and work through this paper and what it might mean for us as employers and as employees.
Yeah, brilliant. Super interesting paper. And what's even more interesting is that in the few days since we decided to talk about the paper, there's been another one actually come out in a European journal with some new and in a lot of cases very similar data. So it's actually no longer just the canary in the coal mine. There's a few canaries out there
Yeah,
at this
absolutely.
point. So
Well,
yeah.
just as way of intro for those who haven't read the paper, and we'll link to the paper in the comments section. But this paper is based on payroll data out of the US. So one of the largest payroll firms out there has made their payroll data available for 25 million workers. So huge data set. And this is now based on fact rather than speculation. So what they're looking at is how the payroll data has changed over the implementation and integration of some of these AI tools, and how that payroll data has changed within subsets of demographics, of industry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get into exactly what they found. Do you want to start us off with, Richard, with what you think is the most kind of salient finding in the paper?
Yeah, for sure. So the paper talks about kind of 6 key facts they found. We're going to focus on probably the first couple because while they're all relevant, I think certainly the first is the standout number, right? So, the paper, I know a quote here, says we find substantial declines in employment for early career workers in occupations most exposed to AI, such as software development and customer support. So what that's telling us is that these early career workers, these entry level roles, we now actually have hard data that there's fewer of those roles are being hired as a direct result of this kind of AI exposure.
Put a
And the
number
paper's
on fewer, just quickly to put a number on fewer, the data says 13%, which might not sound like a massive amount, but that's a huge number in this short period.
right, and it's a really big number. The other interesting thing is that there's a lot of controls for random variables in the paper. Looks like some pretty good methodology. One of the things that they look at is does this model work in the past? Like, could you apply the same model and predict behavior previously? And the very interesting answer is no. In fact, it only really starts working from about 2022, which is when we had the big explosion in large language models becoming more and more relevant and more used. So there's also various controls for types of industries, interestingly, for the post-COVID-19 decline in education outcomes, which they've controlled for as well. And I think that's particularly interesting. But essentially, in large part, it seems clear that the growth in the use of large language models and the tools that wrap around them into businesses are creating what is a big jump in a big decrease in the number of people employed in these roles.
Absolutely. So what they're saying is, just to recap there, that single most important point in my mind is the impact here is isolated, at least at this moment, or by this paper, found in this paper, to those younger early stage career workers in those slightly more automatable jobs. So we can give a couple of examples like software engineer, customer service agents. Those are the two types of roles that they state as being really susceptible to these job losses. Older or later stage career workers seem not to be affected in any serious way at this stage, by at least in these findings, and in those roles that don't seem as easy to disrupt by these tools at this stage. But again, it's also very much at this stage is the couching terminology that I think we need to use here.
Right. I mean, at this stage is really interesting, right? So I think obviously at the moment, that's what we're seeing in the data. We're not seeing these more senior, more experienced roles being affected in terms of, employment numbers. Obviously, one of the theories is that work is maybe less automatable. the paper makes the difference, but makes a point of the difference between roles that are automatable and roles that can be augmented by AI. The data they have at this point is showing that, if the role can simply be augmented by AI, that's not changing the employment numbers for that role. But I think there's an interesting additional point there because, if we look actually in the last week, there's been some data out of Australia about not just declines in employment, and there's a separate paper about that, which we can talk about later, but in terms of actual retrenchments and redundancies of existing workers in some of these roles. So let's pick some examples. And I just want to be very clear for legal purposes here that these are public facts. These companies will tell you that they don't have anything to do with AI. So let's take that at face value for the moment. But just some numbers that have been coming up. So some of the big banks here, and one of them announced that it's going to remove 3,500 of 40,000 plus employees by September next year. That's almost 10% of an entire workforce. At one of the big telecoms firms here, the senior executives have been telling investors that AI adoption will help cut costs and shrink its workforce. And what's interesting is that, they've made a big deal of rolling out, in this case, Microsoft's Copilot. And what we're starting to see is things like graduate roles and clerk roles and things like accounting and consulting reducing because what those roles in those industries are used for often is as assistants to senior staff. And what's happening is those senior staff, apparently, at least anecdotally and potentially backed up by this evidence, are now turning to AI to complete the roles that they would traditionally have given to junior colleagues.
At least some of them, exactly. Or the junior
Right.
colleagues are augmenting their work, so they're doing the work of three as opposed to, one person's doing the work of three. Yeah, 100%.
Right, absolutely. And so you could argue that, maybe the low-level work is automatable, maybe the high-level work is more augmentable. As another example, there's a tech company here that had 12 different technical writers, which is a technical kind of role that involves preparing things for code and development, and they're down to 2. And that's
12.
clear, down to 2 from 12, which is a clear example of the kinds of things people are using LLMs for, right? To kind of create those technical briefs. I think what's also interesting is the data on quality is not there yet. So while we're seeing the numbers on the kinds of people that are being captured that are not, are those roles being replaced with high quality work? Is it equivalent in quality to the junior roles? I'm not assuming it's not, but I think, this is a question that companies don't always ask. We see the profit increase,
Well, and that's the thing. The short-termism that companies often operate based on is quality tends to be something that is more prized in the long term. Short term is fiduciary responsibility. How can we maximize shareholder value? And quality seems to be one of those things that has a bit of a lag effect in the bottom line. So if we can save those dollars now, we'll worry about the quality detriments or things that might come down the track later. That seems to be a pattern that I see quite regularly across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and that is one of the other facts of the 6 that this paper drew out. So they note that entry-level employment has declined in applications of AI that automate work and less effects in those that augment it. So again, that could be that in some of those more augmentable roles, there's still a need for that human in the loop. But I do want to come back to what you said before about at the moment, because I think one of the things that's potentially quite scary for mid-level employees is that as these tools expand their capabilities, as we get better at using them, as we create more usable wraparounds for them, which I think is really interesting, I do wonder at what point we say, well, actually, your mid-level marketing skill is actually more automatable than it was, say, this year, right? This stuff wasn't possible 2 years ago at all.
Seems inevitable. Well, I saw a post a couple of days ago about using Claude just to generate a very complex Excel spreadsheet with a number of formulas based on a single prompt, and it was a real kind of incredibly detailed and well put together really assessment of it was a business forecasting tool. You kind of look the professor that did the prompting was an MBA professor, and he was saying, this would be 6 weeks worth of work for a group of MBA students, and I would give this a high rating. and Claude did this based on a single line prompt in a matter of seconds. And you kind of go, as you say, these tools are only getting better, and how we use them is, to your point, only going to improve as well. But it's at what cost?
Well, and I mean, I think that, so then that I think ties in really well to this other study that's come out recently. Again, we'll post a link. And lots of really interesting correlations between that study and the Stanford one around this kind of early career employment. One of the things they really looked at, though, was the skills that were being used in the workforce now at these different levels. And apologies for the clumsy wording, but they talk about routinizable and non-routinizable skills. I can't say that quickly, but it was really really noteworthy. Then I think in the context of us saying, well, what comes next for mid-tier employment? What comes next for things that are currently augmented? Are those skills already being replaced? And if not, which ones are not? And I think there were three skill categories that the paper identified with the most new and emerging sets of skills. So these were skill requirements and usage that are actually growing right now at the moment. And again, there are some definitions of these in the paper, but they talk about the three being communication, collaboration, and creativity. And that is actually a definable set of skills rather than just a wafty term. They talk about management skills, and they talk about assisting and caring. Obviously, that applies in traditional assisting and caring workforces like nursing, like aged care, but also in a more management sense of team culture and team development. So, I think we're starting to get really concrete data and hone in on which are the important human skills in an AI automated work.
Well, I think that's right. I often get asked, what should I be skilling up in where should I put my attention, my time, my effort, to make sure to minimize my chance of redundancy, to position myself well for the future. And I think while these skills might change, they're probably not going to change drastically. And I think you're right. So can you say those three categories again? Communication, creativity, and collaboration was number one.
That's right. Number two was management skills. Which obviously people related. And number three was very explicitly assisting and caring. So these are, if I was going to give immediate advice to a high school student, so these are where you want to be building your skill sets, because certainly in the next 5 years, that's key. The other interesting point that I think adds to that, right, is the actual need to increase AI literacy and skills for employees. So, if you're in a role that is augmentable, let's say, not automatable, there's going to be an expectation that you will automate parts of your work, that you will be able to augment your work and potentially increase output using AI. And I think that is a significant conclusion from this second paper, that is a skill and an ability that is currently very much underdeveloped in workforces.
Well, it goes. I remember this is something that's not banded around so much now, but 6 months ago, the only kind of aphorism on people's lips with regard to AI was AI is not going to take your job. A person who knows how to use AI is going to take your job. And
Right.
while I think that's no longer strictly true, I think as this paper proves, I think the latter is something to really dial in on and make sure that you start becoming a master of this tool and these tools as they emerge, and keep up to date, because it's it seems somewhat inevitable that the world of work is going to be massively disrupted, and where we land in the next 5, 10, 15 years, who knows? But it's that the ability to retool and keep your finger on the pulse that I think is going to set you up for the best chance of navigating these kind of tumultuous times.
Right. Well, here's a data point for you. So by one estimate, more than 41% of skills in this particular skills database are predicted to be routinizable in the next 5 years as a direct result of the advancement in LM technology. So that is current skills that we know of, that we're seeing trends in automation and routinizability over the next 5 years, which again, has very serious implications for both the upskilling of an existing workforce, and the kind of career choices and development of the incoming workforce, high school or college students at this point. So again, I think as an employer, if we come to like practical elements of things, I would be saying, if you're not currently preparing your workforce for a world of, AI automated intelligence, not just thinking about it from like, which of my staff can I replace with AI, but actually, how am I making sure that everyone in my business can run, with these AI literacy and these AI skills that they're going to need, both in your firm and in others? I think that's a key element that we have almost a moral responsibility, really, as employers to do. Um, it makes a lot of good business sense, but I think it's also about us preparing our society at large for a much more functional set of the next 5 years, because they'll have those skills.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's so much doomsdaying out there at the moment. A lot of people are talking about the, mass unemployment and the requirements for things like UBI, universal basic income, and all this kind of stuff. Which, again, who knows? I think we underestimate the significance of some of these technological change, but we overestimate also the speed with which these things happen. So, I don't think that in most cases these are going to be tectonic shifts that emerge in the next 6, 12, maybe even 18 months. But I think it's hard to know what the future looks like because it just changes so rapidly. But I do think you're right. It is about keeping your finger on the pulse and having, you almost see as your point, that moral responsibility to think in these ways, to not just set yourself up, but set the people up around you for the best chance of success in whatever this world looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as we've said before, that's going to tie into how you learn. It's going to tie into how you prepare yourself for the work that you're doing, how you prepare yourself for the next pieces of work, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, this is a key piece. I will take slight disagreement with you on one point. I think, if we've got banks dropping 10% of their workforce in the next 12 months already, then I would be thinking really, really hard about what it is that those people are going to need in terms of skills, because clearly what they're currently doing, their employer doesn't deem employable anymore. Um, and I will say, there's two sides to this. I think, maybe next time we can wrap in an old favorite, which is of course the very famous article and subsequent book on bullshit jobs.
Yep. Braver.
Because I think there's a world in which perhaps we can shed some of those bullshit jobs.
Yep.
But I also think we need to be, cognizant of the fact that these are real humans who are being paid to do jobs. And maybe those jobs didn't need to exist, and maybe the firms were really taking the mickey. But ultimately they were, that you still need to pay your rent, you still need to pay your utilities, you still need to buy food for your families.
Exactly. And you still need something to purpose when you wake up in the morning. It's what fills that void? That's a question that needs to be thought about.
Yeah. Well, that got quite deep quite quickly.
Always does.
And I think, yeah. So I think that's a good place that we can probably wrap this up at this point. I look forward to talking next time, when I think we're going to dive into a few more deep concepts around this. We might get a little more philosophical about the purpose of work. And yeah, I look forward to the next conversation.
Likewise. Thanks, Richard. See you next time.
Cool. Okay, can we do the end? That was a shit end. Can we just do the end again? Because I feel like that was a really weak conclusion. Because I hadn't thought of one yet.
Realistically, most people aren't going to.
Sure, no, that's fine. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Like that.
Cool.
I don't mind that as a
okay.
Nice key.
Right. Cool. I mean, let's just see if we can do that now in like 60 seconds.
Okay. So how about we each give in like say 20 to 30 seconds, give our key takeaway. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So I really appreciate this conversation, Richard. In my mind, there's a central takeaway here, which is we've now got solid data, granted out of the US, but on a big data set, that these AI tools are replacing jobs real time in quite a significant way, at least in some sectors across some demographics. So for me, this is really just again, as the title of the paper is Canary in the Coal Mine, this is the first signal that we really have job disruptions coming as a result of AI. So I think we need to think deeply about what this means as employees and as employers. What about yourself?
Yeah, and I think it's exactly that point, right? We need to be thinking about what happens next. So what do we do for people who are currently in the workforce? What do we do for people who are about to enter it? And the ones who are 5 years away, right? Who are now just starting their maybe high school or college journeys to say, what does my employability look like? And I actually think we're starting to get real clear information that we could use to guide those choices. Like these are the human skills, these are the non-routinizable skills. So I'd love to see us starting to integrate a lot more of that into course planning, career planning, and employee development as we go through.
Are you? See you next time.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.
Great. For that one?
Okay. That sounds better. Okay, cool.
We'll be able to cut and paste those bits.
No,
And there'll
exactly.
be something usable in there.
I'm gonna stop so it can do